One early morning, a high-ranking executive from a large international company receives an email. Well, 2 emails to be precise. Both of them are from Facebook, and they look identical? Oh, turns out somebody tried logging into that person's account. But no worries, Facebook prevented that from happening. The account has to be restored now. It's almost 8 in the morning. Is there time for that? Well, maybe. Log in, enter the email, get the password. Darn CAPTCHA. Alright, this'll have to be sorted out some other time. Way too many steps. The executive closes the window and leaves. But his computer continues working. It has a new owner now. What we just witnessed was a textbook case of spear phishing. One of the Facebook emails was real, the other one wasn't. Somebody gambled on the executive clicking the wrong one. The gamble paid off. A small file was downloaded on the executive's computer. Inside, a piece of malware was hidden. The executive wasn't the only one to get hacked this way. The same story was happening all over the company. Thousands of people received phishing messages warning them of a problem with their Facebook or Google accounts. Most of the employees were smart enough not to get phished, but at least a few weren't. Those few accidentally granted the attackers control over the entire company. Within several days, the hackers had access to everything. It was 2014. The company subjected to this attack was Sony Pictures Entertainment. In the following months, the exfiltrated data was trickled into the wild, in small and well-orchestrated doses, to cause as much damage as possible. The result was a publicity campaign that set the scene for almost every high-profile leak that happened later, showing that it's not the attack itself that causes the most damage. It's the fallout. This lesson defined both hacktivism and state-sponsored cyber warfare for a generation, and the cyber world was never the same. There was no rollback. The spark that set these events in motion was lit in the 90s and the 2000s, right here on the Korean Peninsula. For a couple decades, it seemed like the communist North and capitalist South were moving closer together. Their relations saw a period of warming. The largest one since a war in the 50s split the peninsula in 2. But the warming did not last. By the late 2000s, both sides became more and more disillusioned, and diplomatic niceties got replaced with accusations of malice. North Korea refused to stop its nuclear program. South Korea lost hope that it ever would. And in 2010, the countries exchanged artillery strikes on each other's territories, and the peninsula was on the brink of war again. Seeking an edge in negotiations, North Korea would occasionally launch attempts at intimidation, like sinking South Korea's ships, bombing its islands, and abducting soldiers. But soon, it discovered one more way to demonstrate its power to the neighbor: cyberattacks. At that time, the news headlines were dominated by anonymous and other hacktivist groups that dished out attacks left and right. Prosecuting their perpetrators was nearly impossible. Even finding out their identities was extremely difficult. The hackers would use provocative language, eye-popping visuals, and meme-laden language to enact chaotic vengeance in complete disregard to national borders. Could a government use this as a smokescreen for some covert activity? The idea seemed natural enough. Conspiracy theories about Anonymous being just a front for some 3-letter agency were abundant. In a better substantiated example, when some Russian politicians organized a massive DDoS campaign in Estonia in 2007, they initially framed it as a grassroots initiative, before admitting their involvement several years later. North Korean intelligence services were not stupid. They understood that this new technique had a lot of potential. Soon, they began targeting South Korean infrastructure. Their attacks were not just an expression of mindless rage, they were well thought out and measured, a show of force to intimidate the rival nation. On the 4th of July 2009, after international sanctions on North Korea were tightened following another one of its nuclear tests, huge DDoS attacks were launched on both South Korean and American government websites. In 2011, North Koreans used phishing to infiltrate South Korean banks and government offices, and laid in wait for 7 months before launching a crippling attack from within.
No one was making any deposits or withdrawals from South Korea's 3 major banks today, as computer screens at automatic tellers were left frozen, some up to 7 hours.
Then, in March 2013, North Korea shut down South Korean public broadcasters, detonating a powerful wiper within days of another round of sanctions being announced.
the South Korean military said it would bolster online surveillance. Another precaution as relations between North and South grow more strained on the ground and in cyberspace.
In all of these cases, the attackers would pretend that they were hacktivists, concerned citizens who just happened to be aligned with peaceful, progressive, and pacifist North Korea in their moral values. The cover would have been believable if not for one thing: the sophistication of the attacks. Massive infiltration operations, sophisticated techniques to exploit the target's infrastructure from within, launching proprietary military-grade malware. With all due credit to Anonymous and its brethren, this was not something bored teenagers would do for the lulz. Those were masterfully planned and executed military operations with clear political backing. In fact, political backing was the main reason they happened. And with North Korea's next attack, everything would get more political yet. By the way, liking this video, leaving a comment, and subscribing to our channel is quite definitely not going to bring the wrath of state-sponsored hackers on you. We've checked, 100% guarantee. So please do that. Back in the early 2000s, two Canadian filmmakers, Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, got an idea to do a film about a TV show host assassinating a world leader. The inherent moral dilemma seemed like a good backdrop for a situational comedy. At different points in time, they considered making it about Osama bin Laden and a fictional third world leader, before settling on Kim Jong-il, the supreme leader of North Korea. The switch was actually encouraged by the executives at Sony, who felt that grounding the film in reality might give it more potential. Then, Kim Jong-il died in 2011. However, his successor Kim Jong-un was an even better fit, given his perceived love of Western products and, well, extravagant manners. As Kim ascended to the throne, every glimpse into his personal life and unorthodox behavior gave the filmmakers more and more inspiration. The release of the film neared, and the publicity campaign began. North Korea reacted. Its news agency called the upcoming picture an act of terrorism, and the director a gangster mobilized by the American government to slander the North Korean leader. Needless to say, the response didn't cause Sony to stop the production. In fact, it caused quite a publicity spike, and the film began getting more attention than ever, as people speculated whether it was going to cause World War III or not. But for North Korea, the talk of retaliation wasn't just words. First attempts to spearfish Sony's executives began in 2014, around the time the first trailers for the film were released. The attackers found the social media accounts of key personnel in the company and performed several attempts to log in. The pages immediately sent notifications to the owners, and the hackers sent their well-prepared duplicates. Opening the wrong email and trying to restore the account would lead to a file being downloaded. We don't really know how that particular part worked and what the file looked like. The story you saw in the intro includes a bit of speculation there. The domains were scrubbed soon after the campaign ended, so all we can do is guess how exactly the hackers convinced the victims to download the malware. What we do know is that the download contained a variant of Bramble, a computer worm North Korea used numerous times before. It would steal login credentials and beam them to a particular set of email addresses outlined in the worm's code. It would also attempt to spread to other computers on the network and turn every one of them into a proxy the attackers could use. To be fair, there is still some doubt if Bramble was really created by North Koreans. However, at least according to an investigation by the FBI, the IP addresses used to connect to those proxies were North Korean, one of multiple leads that hinted at the origin of the attack. Bramble's email addresses were on Gmail. The FBI claims it managed to confirm, possibly with Google's help, that North Korean IP addresses were also used to access those emails. The attackers used no proxies to conceal their identities, probably thinking that nobody would manage to track them. This is another hint at where the attackers were located. Given that North Korean access to the internet is extremely limited, strictly monitored by the military, and confined to a small number of high-ranking individuals, the possibility of spoofing North Korean IPs seemed very unlikely. It's even less likely that independent North Korean cybercriminals would try attacking a foreign company. Bramble was only the first step of the attack. The second step most likely involved another piece of malware called Jonap. It was a backdoor, which would typically be installed by Bramble. Jonap was a remote access tool. It gave the attackers full control over the victim's machine and allowed for easy exfiltration of files. Most likely, it was the way the hackers snatched gigabytes upon gigabytes of material from Sony's systems, because access to the executives' emails was not the only thing they were after. In late November, Sony's employees began receiving emails with ransom demands. The attackers, who called themselves Guardians of Peace, said nothing about the interview, but demanded Sony pay money in exchange for not leaking its secrets. As far as we know, those emails were sent straight to the spam folder, so the attackers went for a more drastic measure. On November 24, ransomware was activated on every computer the hackers infected, making them unusable. The company was paralyzed and finally paid attention, but still not the ransom. So the leaks began, causing a fallout that shook Hollywood to its core. Every few days, the attackers would release a cache of information obtained from Sony's systems, personal information of Sony Pictures Entertainment employees, including celebrities, personal emails where those employees would exchange spicy details, call their colleagues names, and complain about the company. Very little of that was surprising. People suspected that many celebrities aren't very nice people, and that Sony doesn't treat its workforce very well. But seeing all of it proven and displayed in public was quite a spectacle, and it gave gossip-hungry media a lot to process. The hackers obviously knew how to hack Sony's network, but apparently, they also knew how to hack the public's attention. Now, the executives finally began noticing the weird emails, but at this point, there was no way to connect the attack to anything in particular. All the Guardians of Peace talked about was punishing Sony for some bad behavior and demanding payment. The whole attack came on the heels of a string of other famous hacking stories, when several hackers managed to fish their way into the iCloud accounts of multiple celebrities and leaked their intimate photos. Sony was also revenge hacked 3 years prior by some angry gamers, so the breach didn't seem out of the ordinary, no matter how serious it was. Only in December, the hackers began giving hints of what their purpose was. They demanded Sony to stop the release of the interview, in perfect accordance with the language used by North Korean propaganda. With the trickle of leakable information running out, they unleashed threats to conduct real-life acts of terrorism at cinemas, and the story suddenly became a lot more serious. Sony flinched and delayed the release. Cinemas began refusing to show the movie. The production of other films featuring North Korea was stopped, and even President Barack Obama got involved. On the surface, this might have seemed like a win for the attackers, but the publicity effort struck again. By this point, so much buzz had been generated around the film that upon its digital release, it turned into a box office success. There have been numerous doubts about North Korea's involvement in the cyber attack. Attribution is a very tricky business, and conclusions are often made from the tiniest specks of evidence, specks that can easily be spoofed or faked. The emails, the ransom, and the leaks were straight from the playbooks of popular hacktivist groups at the time, and North Korea strictly denied its involvement. Nevertheless, commending the hackers and praising them.
This hack attack towards the US film producer Sony Pictures is clearly the righteous act of our sympathisers and supporters who came forward following our appeal. Thus, the misfortunes that Sony Pictures experienced can only be seen as a just punishment for its evil doings and unjustified actions.
Multiple cybersecurity experts came forward saying that an insider at Sony or a hacktivist collective, a la Anonymous, was a much more likely explanation. However, multiple detailed reports were produced by numerous agencies and private companies, and all of those reports came to the same conclusion. The attack could not have been perpetrated by an insider. No phishing campaign would have been needed for that. Proprietary malware and sprawling command and control infrastructure hinted at an actor with resources only a state-sponsored group could have. The same malware and infrastructure were previously used in spying operations on military targets in South Korea and elsewhere, and reused in multiple other campaigns that have been unmistakably tied to North Korea. And so, a new international threat actor was born, Lazarus Group. Later hacks earned it a place among the world's most dreaded hacker organizations, particularly after the purpose of this group changed. In the years after the Sony hack, it moved past DDoSing South Korea and attacking anyone who made fun of Kim Jong-un. With experience, it became an integral part of the North Korean economy by staging record-breaking bank heists and cryptocurrency thefts. In some of them, it used the same exact method the Sony executives were breached: a warning about a social media account, an infected email, Bramble, and Jonap. But the Sony hack wasn't just the birthplace of a new infamous threat actor. It was also one of the first cases of the United States casting blame on another government for a cyber attack.
We can confirm that North Korea engaged in this attack. They caused a lot of damage. We will respond.
In 2018, the Department of Justice officially indicted Park Jin-hyuk, an alleged high-ranking member of Lazarus, for the attack. Lazarus Group was given a face. The story of this attack also reverberated through the circles of real hacktivists. It showed that large international corporations are truly vulnerable. One phishing campaign can cause them immense damage. It's quite likely that all those phishing messages you get on social media were, at least in part, inspired by this particular attack. And so, up to this day, the Sony hack of 2014 is routinely mentioned as one of the most influential cyber attacks of all time, because it left a significant imprint in the landscape of cybersecurity, even despite the fact that it got prompted by a dictator being angry at a third-rate comedy full of toilet humor and bad special effects. This was the third episode of No Rollback, a series where we look back at the events that changed the cyber world to the point of no return. In the next episode, we're going to look at another one of these stories. Do you have a suggestion? Let us know in the comments, and we might deliver on it. At least if North Korea doesn't decide to retaliate against us for this episode. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.